In this video, we will continue and complete our overview of the way in which intervals are traditionally classified. We have already seen that this classification derived initially from the terms second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, octave, which correspond to different degrees on the major scale. To better understand this classification, we must differentiate between two groups of intervals. The first group contains the second, the third, the sixth, and the seventh. We have already seen that all of these intervals can be qualified major or minor. The second group is made up of the intervals octave, fifth, and fourth. These intervals can be neither major nor minor. We call these perfect. In current usage, when we talk about a fifth, a fourth, and octave intervals, what we really mean is perfect fifth, perfect fourth, and perfect octave. There is further terminology that allows us to qualify an interval. These terms are called diminished and augmented. For all intervals called perfect, that is to say the fourth, the fifth, and the octave, the logic is clear. Giving the term augmented to an interval will mean raising the interval by a semitone. The term diminished will have the opposite effect and will mean lowering the interval by a semitone. Let's look at this in detail. The fourth. When we raise the perfect fourth by a semitone, we obtain an augmented fourth interval. This interval has a distance of 3 tones, the equivalent to that of the tritone, which we have already observed. If this time we lower the perfect fourth by a semitone, we will obtain a diminished interval. This interval has a distance of 2 tones, equivalent to that of a major third. Now concerning the fifth. If we add a semitone to the perfect fifth, we will obtain an augmented fifth interval. This interval will have a distance of 4 tones, equivalent to that of a minor sixth. If this time we lower the perfect fifth by a semitone, we will then obtain a diminished fifth interval. This interval has a distance of 3 tones, a distance corresponding to that of an augmented fourth. Therefore, the intervals augmented fourth, tritone, and diminished fifth have exactly the same distance in tones. Let's continue. The terms augmented and diminished can also be used for the first group of intervals composed of the second, the third, the sixth, and the seventh, but with a few nuances. For this group of intervals, the term augmented also means the raising of the interval by a semitone. But don't forget that this notation applies only to the major second, the major third, the major sixth, and the major seventh. Therefore, when we talk about the augmented second, we actually mean the augmented major second. An augmented second corresponds to a minor third. An augmented third corresponds to a perfect fourth. An augmented sixth corresponds to a minor seventh. And finally, an augmented seventh corresponds to a perfect octave. By the same logic, when we diminish a second, a third, a sixth, or a seventh, we refer ourselves to the major second, major third, major sixth, or the major seventh. But be careful! The term diminished, when applied to these intervals, will this time lower the interval not just by a semitone, but by a full tone. Therefore, A diminished second is a diminished major second and corresponds to the interval that we call unison. When two instruments play the same note at an identical pitch, we say that they are playing in unison. A diminished third corresponds to a diminished major third and corresponds to the interval of the major second. Be careful! Do not confuse a diminished third with a minor third. A diminished sixth corresponds to a diminished major sixth and corresponds to the interval of the perfect fifth. Here also, be careful. Do not confuse a diminished sixth with a minor sixth. A diminished seventh corresponds to a diminished major seventh and corresponds to the major sixth interval. Here also, be careful. Do not confuse a diminished seventh with a minor seventh. They are two distinct intervals. So, we have arrived at the end of our overview of the traditional interval classifications, and as you have seen, certain notations have some subtleties to them. This theoretical and analytical knowledge, once acquired, will allow you to have a completely clear understanding of these terms currently used in music in order to classify the intervals and what they truly correspond to.